What I got for your face balls today is this mess right here. So this happens to be the Kershaw Induction, and for those that don't know, it is sporting the Hawk lock from Grant and Gavin Hawk, and it's quite an interesting thing. So I tore this knife down just to clean it up and yeah, check out the Hawk lock and see how it all functions and works and all that stuff. And so I'm gonna show you guys how this thing operates. There are a couple of older videos out there. You know, this is an older model, but it just didn't seem like they really explained it very well what is actually going on in here. So yeah, I figured I would check it out and let you guys see what makes this thing tick. I would say, if you're not pretty mechanically inclined, I probably would not take this knife apart. It is, as you can see, there's a lot of little pieces here. There are springs that will go flying if you don't kind of pay attention to what's going on. It's not extremely difficult. Honestly, the worst thing about taking this thing apart, and the reason I didn't do it on camera, is just because of the insane amount of Loctite that was on the pivot. So yeah, I had to heat this thing up to pretty insane temperatures to get this Loctite to break free. And what it had on it was a white Loctite, and man, it was brutal. It's kind of interesting because you can see the flat right there on the pivot. Let's see if I can show this off. Yeah, you can see the D shape right there on the pivot. However, that does not correspond to anything on either side of the scales, and it is not tooled on this side, so makes it for a pretty serious pain in the ass to get apart. I actually, yeah, you can kind of tell right here, you can see this line. This is like a bruise or like a blood blister from me squeezing this knife, and I'll show you here how I deal with getting knives apart that are super tight and with a non-captured pivot. So anyway, we'll just throw this bronze washer in here quick. And so this thing is riding on phosphor bronze, as well as having a couple of very, very thin nylon or Teflon washers. And so where's the blade stop? So, oh, the one thing I didn't point out here, so you can see on the blade what makes up this Hawk lock. As far as the blade is concerned, you got these two pins right here, and they're only on one side of the blade, so you can see the other side of the pin there, but it's flush with the tang of the blade. So the Hawk lock all operates from the show side. So, you know, I'm sure some people out there would say that it's not as strong because of that, and you know, there's probably some truth to that. Having a lock that you know, something like a access lock where it's captured into both scales, but you know, if you think about it, with a liner lock or a frame lock, you only have one side as well. So you know, it's really not any different than that scenario. So yeah. But so you got those two pins there. I'm gonna put this together kind of half-assed here at the beginning, just enough to hold the knife together, and I'm going to show you how this lock operates. So this is a T8 on the pivot, and then the rest of the body screws are T6s, which, like I said, all the body screws came out just fine. No big deal there. Get a different tool. Alright, so now we got just enough in here to kind of hold the knife together briefly. So what you can see here, you've got this, there's this piece of G10 that sits over all this that hides your Hawk lock or encases the Hawk lock. But what you can see here is you have this circular area here, and you can see one of those pins that's on the blade, and this is what provides the detent for the blade, which I'll show you here in a moment. And then as the blade opens up, you can see, if my camera cooperates, you can see here the other pin come around the circle there. So how this works is you have these two pieces that sit in here. Let me set this down. Like I said, this is a bit of a fidgety thing to take apart and get back together. It's not horrible, but so you've got these two sliding pieces here, and then when you throw on your G10, obviously you have just the one switch that is visible or accessible. But what goes on here, you've got these milled grooves back here, and there's springs that push both of these plates outward. Oh, I got the one in upside down. Here I am in a hurry, not paying attention to what I'm doing. So, flip this guy over. So the orientation on these things is important. So when the knife is in the closed position, this is what you have. And then, like I said, you have these two springs that are sitting in these grooves here. Now there is a little stainless steel rod that goes inside the spring, which I can only assume that, you can see it between my fingers right there, they're really tiny. And I can only assume that they put those in there to keep the springs from bunching up. But yeah, at no point do those really come into play here, so I'm assuming it's for assembly. But anyway, get the camera to focus, there we go. So you can see that these slide out of the way. So if I kind of hold a little bit of tension on these, and we go ahead and open the blade, you can see the bottom one gets pushed back, which normally would have spring tension against it. So that provides the detent. So the detent has to compress that spring to slide the one piece back, this piece right here. And so once it overcomes that spring tension, then the blade flies out. And then now you can see that the second one is coming around and it pushes back our lever bar and comes all the way around, and you still have spring tension, and then it locks in just like so. And so then the spring tension on these two bars is locking that knife in place along with the blade stop up here in the back. So, and then when you want to retract the knife, you pull back on this lever right here, and then the blade comes around. And then the reason this knife makes a little noise when it goes to close is when it's coming back up on that detent, essentially, it rocks, it pushes this slide out of the way, comes to this position, and then this is your closed position. But you can see that this is also one of the other kind of cool things about this knife, is it's one of the only flipper tab knives that, you know, short of the wing stop or whatever they call that design, I can't remember, kick stop or something, where the flipper tab isn't actually hooked to the blade. But this flipper tab is part of the blade, but when it comes around and opens, it does not stick out down here, creating, you know, a blade stop, if you will, or a choil or anything like that. So most flipper knives, you know, the flipper tab comes and sticks down. Oh, I'm sure I have an example right here, like this. So then, you know, the flipper tab is sticking down there, which is pretty standard on flipper knives. You don't have that here on the Kershaw Induction. So it's kind of an interesting blade shape, interesting geometry. It's kind of a cool setup. I mean, it is kind of complex, and there are a lot of little pieces in there, but it's definitely interesting and different, and that's why I like it. You know, and this happens to be like a $20 knife. So you're looking at aluminum scale material here, and of course all these components are stainless steel. And I think the blade's 8CR if I remember correctly, but we'll go ahead and throw those down. So the way that I got this bruise on my hand is that the pivot barrel goes all the way through both scales, And you know, some guys will open the knife and push down and kind of create a, you know, pinch the pivot barrel in between the scales. What I found generally works pretty reliably and easily is I just take the knife and squeeze it really hard in my hand, and then undo the pivot. And I'm doing the same thing. You know, it's pushing against the blade stop, and you know, trying to pull the pivot barrel. I'm just creating tension between the pivot barrel and the scales and the blade, that sandwich in there. And so anytime you have when you don't have a captured pivot and you've got a Loctite scenario and the other side of the pivot is not tooled, then this is the fight that you have to deal with. So this one was just harder than most, and you end up with that. So like I said, this knife was a real serious pain in the ass to get this pivot screw broke loose. But as you can see, I won and didn't tear up the screw at all, which is fantastic. So let me get this. So we're going to put this guy back together, and the first thing we're going to do is, because of the way this knife is assembled, you can assemble the hawk lock independent of the rest of the knife. So that's pretty cool. I am going to put just a little bit of some KPL heavy. Just put a couple little spots here where these bars are going to be sliding. I don't want to put a ton in there, just a few little dots. And so, ooh, thought I threw a spring on the floor. So here's your spring, and here's your little pin. And like I said, the little pin goes inside the spring, and the only thing I can work out in my mind for why they do that is just for assembly purposes, to keep the spring from bending like this when they try to put tension on it, but you know, or try to compress it, I mean. But even then, it's still, the little rod that's inside there, you know, it's not quite long enough. And so then I was thinking, well, maybe it's a stop to keep the pieces from traveling too far, but they don't bottom out that far. So it just really doesn't make a whole lot of sense why they're there. So I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, the best I can come up with is that they are there for assembly reasons. So here we go. I'm going to see, hopefully not lose the springs, but you can see we're completely assembled here. I just got to put the cover on, and so here are the springs. If I took my finger away, oh, I just lost one. Son of a bitch, I took my finger away too far. Alright, so, well, I'm going to pause right here. Alright, y'all, we're back in. Alright, now I got my two springs. I just tried to pick my finger up just to show you guys that, and that little bastard flew out of there and flew across the room. So, that's what I'm talking about. Anyway, so, good thing was I found it pretty easily, so that worked out. So I'm not going to do that again. So you can see here I got my two plates in, and creating that little triangle right here for that one, or for the blade stop, or the blade pin to go in there. And now what I'm doing is I'm sliding this G10 piece over the springs so they don't come flying out again. And I want to get it down over the switch, or the lever, just like so. So now we're still not out of the woods yet. We got to get some screws in this guy. So there is one screw that is longer, and it goes into the barrel spacer, which happens to be this screw hole right here. So that top screw hole is one that you will put together when you join this to the other side. And so let me get these screws in here before I lose the spring again. should be good now. Feeling a lot better about it. I don't want to have to crawl around on the floor again looking for a damn spring. Alright. So, got one more here. Sorry, get my big fat hands out of the way. Alright, so like I said, you got a barrel spacer that rides in this hole right here. So you have a little bit of a longer screw that goes into that location. But you can see portions of your hawk lock here. So if I manipulate the switch, you can see the spring tension there. And it moves that top slider. So what we're going to do here is bring this guy back in. And we are going to put down, again, a little bit of oil here. Just a touch. I'm going to put just a tiny bit on the pivot itself. Okay. And then I'm going to put down the Teflon. And then I'm going to put down the bronze washer. And I'm just putting ever so slightly, just the tiniest bit of lube on there. Mainly just because this thing, they have the satin finish from the belt going onto the pivot area. And so, yeah, I'm just adding a little bit of lubrication there. So, get that guy down there. And we're going to put this down this direction. And I'm going to put the other Teflon washer. Just put the tiniest bit of lube on that little guy. And then go back together. Now, it did appear that there was a D shape in this G10 cover right here for the pivot, but when I was trying to get that Loctite out of there, it just, you know, spun the pivot barrel inside the spun the pivot barrel inside of that, and it just made that whole round. So anyway, it's not the greatest setup there, just because if in fact that was that way, and I don't know if it was 100% or not. I'm just kind of looking at the hole just because the hole looks a little messed up, but it very easily could have been that way right from the factory. I don't know, but if in fact it was that way, or it was a D-shape hole on the G10, it's really a piss poor design. I mean, the G10 right there is super thin, so it just isn't going to help you out hardly at all for holding that pivot screw, especially with the crazy ass insane Loctite that they're using. So I don't think we're totally in here. There we go. Now, whatever they used for Loctite on this thing was an absolute, just a beast. I mean, it was the most insane Loctite I've ever come across. I'm not sure how hot I got that thing, but the hottest, I mean, it's the only time I've ever worn a glove doing this, just because this aluminum scale on this side was getting so hot I couldn't touch it. So that's certainly not normal. Generally, you can get Loctite to break loose much sooner than that. So anyway, I'm going to This barrel spacer is spinning on me here. So I'm going to get this guy tightened up. There we go. And then we'll just check this back one here just to make sure. So Kershaw, you know, I mean, this is a budget knife, you know, so I really shouldn't complain much at all. Action on this thing, which I've got too tight right now, is actually pretty good. I've heard several people say that they thought this knife was riding on bearings, which is kind of interesting. But for a budget knife, I actually do have a little bit of blade play there. There we go. And I think we're just going to have to let it work in a little bit. I mean, you can still get it to do its thing, but it's definitely nice and smooth. It's just not super free falling. The other thing that I did was I changed the direction of the pivot. So the next time when you buy this guy new, which is really what my whole goal here was, and the main reason that I tore this guy down, when you buy this guy new, this non-tooled side of the pivot is on the show side. Well, you cannot remove this plate to service anything with the hawk lock, which certainly, you know, you could get dirt and stuff in there that could mess up the action. And so I wanted to spin the pivot around to have the tooled side here, so then I could remove this plate without taking the rest of the knife down. So that's kind of was my goal. So, you know, I was able to make that happen. But again, you know, it's a cool knife, something different, and certainly, you know, the action's good. I think it's kind of cool that the flipper tab, you know, hides in the handle when the blade's open. And there's just not too many knives that do that. And this thing's pretty ergonomic. You got a nice hollow grind. It is 8CR, but you know, it's a cool knife. You know, not a whole, or not a total deep carry. You know, you got quite a bit sticking out of the pocket. But again, for 20 bucks, it's a pretty cool knife. You know, maybe they're 25. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll throw a link up in the description if you guys are interested in picking one of these up. It is a well done. You know, it's kind of surprising to me that they can sell it that cheap, because it's a cool knife that has a lot of pieces. And if you just want to, you know, check out the hawk lock and what it's all about, yeah, it's a good way to do that without spending a whole bunch of money. So here it is. Kershaw Induction hawk lock, pretty cool knife. And right now, if you don't know, I've got a Christmas giveaway going on, and so check that out. I posted that a few days ago, and yeah, you guys should, if you haven't checked that video out, go do that, because there's some cool stuff we're giving away, and it's just kind of fun and something to do for the holidays. Anyway, guys, thanks a lot for checking this out. We will see you next time.